Last week, a water main broke in Calgary, Alberta, affecting over 50% of the water supply that Calgary has access to. Calgarians are now being asked to reduce their water, to stop watering their lawns, to take shorter showers, to do laundry less often. And there's still a very real chance that Calgary could run out of water before the water main is fixed. To philosophers, this is a recognizable problem, and it's called a collective action problem. Collective action problems are particularly difficult. They involve a large number of people who have to collectively make decisions that will be in their best interest, but each individual can reasonably say that their act makes no difference. Take the case of Calgarians. Each individual person can say that whether they take a shorter shower or not, or whether they do an extra load of laundry, that is not going to make a recognizable or measurable difference to the amount of water that Calgary has. Yet, if everybody reasons that way, then Calgary will deplete its water and that'll be worse off for everybody. This is a puzzle. What to do? Collective action problems are everywhere, and they're actually one of the hardest problems to solve in ethics, because the difficulty is trying to figure out how do we actually justify getting people to do what seems like obviously the right thing. Calgarians should obviously save water, and it would be bad for somebody, it seems like it would be unethical for somebody to say, this doesn't apply to me, I can still go on as though nothing really changes. That if we discovered that somebody was reasoning that way, that we could reasonably conclude that that was a bad thing for them to do. But the problem is to explain how that can be the case, because that person can correctly say that their action makes no difference. Now, sure, if they filled up their swimming pool and then drained it and then filled it again, eventually they could make a difference. But in this type of case, and in many other types of cases, one individual's action is just not going to make enough of a difference overall to measure or to make a difference to the kind of total aggregate amount of things. So collective action problems are not just about water, they are all over the place. So think about voting. If you vote in a national election, it is extremely unlikely that a single vote is going to make a difference for that election. And so each individual can say that their vote makes no difference. Once again, in aggregate, of course, people's votes do make a difference, but it's only in aggregate. If somebody wins an election by 100,000 votes, then all of those people, the 100,000 people, could say that their vote really didn't make a difference. Whether they voted or not would not have changed the outcome of the election. Think about climate change. If you buy a flight to an international flight to go somewhere, people often, you can go online and find these carbon trackers to figure out how much emissions you've contributed. But actually, those are kind of inaccurate in an important way. If I buy a ticket to fly, it's true that I am contributing to that flight happening, but whether I bought that ticket or not for a 747, it is very unlikely that my decision to purchase that ticket actually had an effect or determined whether that flight was going to go. It's just unlikely that the way that airlines operate is that based on a single purchase of a ticket. If I hadn't bought that ticket, the plane probably still would have flown, and either it would have had an empty seat or it would have had somebody else take the place of it. So it just doesn't seem like our actions in a bunch of these ways are that refined. A couple more examples. Think about somebody who's polluting in another way. If you buy an electric vehicle versus a vehicle that pollutes a lot, in aggregate, the amount of global warming or climate change that single vehicle is going to make is not really going to make a perceptible difference. So each individual can say that they just don't really make enough of a difference for it to matter. If you're vegetarian, that it's similar to the buying a plane ticket sort of issue, that if you go to the grocery store and you buy a chicken, it's not as though that somebody gets on the phone and calls up the factory farm and orders another chicken to be grown and slaughtered. All of the decisions at a supermarket occur at such a big scale that you could get 20 people to stop buying chickens, and that still might not have an effect on how much they order. So all of these things are collective action problems because in aggregate, it makes a big difference and it can have a huge impact on our lives, as in climate change and voting and other cases. But each individual can correctly say that their act makes no difference. One way of thinking about this puzzle is thinking about the consequences of our action. So different moral theories put different weights on how much consequences matter. Consequentialist theories, such as utilitarianism, think that consequences are everything. But even other theories, deontological theories or virtue theories, that they also think that consequences matter. They just don't think that consequences are the whole thing. But no matter what theory you take, it's kind of strange in collective action cases to say that the consequences don't matter. The whole reason that everybody should be doing their part to save water is that we're trying to save water. The consequence that we're trying to get is to use less water so they can fix the water main so that the city doesn't run out of water, which would have huge negative impacts for lots of people. That is the thing that we care about. It's not about kind of like being virtuous or some other kind of thing where the consequences aren't really important. In collective action problems, it is the consequences that matter the most. So obviously we need to appeal to consequences in order to justify how we should act. But what makes collective action problems so difficult is that each individual can say their consequences don't matter. So that's really the nature of the puzzle. Consequences are the thing that is motivating the problem in the first place, but each individual can correctly say that their consequences are not playing a big role. So how do we get out of this puzzle? This is not an easy thing to fix, and I think that it's useful to think about collective action problems and to recognize them because they are so common and they are so intractable. But there are a few things that we can consider. One option you might have already thought of is reasoning, well, what if everybody did that? And this is a very common strategy, and we pick up on it actually from a really early age. Children will start to kind of like think about it and think about ethics issues in this way. Well, what if everybody did that? In this kind of case, it does actually give us the right result, because if everybody did ignore the water advisory, filled up their swimming pools, like wash their cars, whatever, then that would actually contribute to the problem and make things a lot worse. So it does give us the correct result, because by zooming out in that way or by applying that rule to everybody, it produces the result that we're trying to avoid. That is the nature of the collective action problem. But I think that there are actually two issues with this kind of approach, and these issues show why I just don't think it works very well. The first issue is that this explanation works in cases, but it can actually be overbroad. It can prove too much. So an example from Derek Parfit is, what if everybody became a dentist? Well, if everybody became a dentist, that would be really bad, because there would be way too many dentists and there wouldn't be people doing all the other important stuff that we care about. And it's not that that shows that there's something wrong about anyone becoming a dentist, but it does show that there's a problem with using this approach of asking, what if everybody did that? And we can ask it for all kinds of other things. What if everybody traveled to Calgary on one single day? You know, that would overrun the city and there wouldn't be enough kind of like stuff, wouldn't be enough space for everybody. But that doesn't show that becoming a dentist or traveling to Calgary is wrong. It shows that it's not going to work in some types of cases. But then the problem is, well, it gets us the right result in the water saving case, but it gets us the wrong result in the dentist case. And doesn't seem to be a good reason why we should accept it in one and not the other. So I think we should throw it out for that reason. Another problem with the what if everyone did it approach is that it's actually not even clear that it works as a solution, because somebody could reasonably respond, well, I'm not saying everyone should do it. And it's kind of implausible to imagine that everyone would ignore the water advisory. Instead, what they could say is, I'm just saying I should do it, or a few people should be able to do it. And then that would be totally fine. That's like the whole point of the collective action problem, what makes it a problem. So if you say, well, what if everyone did that? You could say, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying that I should be able to get away with it, but other people shouldn't. There's still something kind of ethically unsatisfying about that answer. We wouldn't be very persuaded by it, but explaining why is harder to do. What we need to do instead is to change the choices that people make so that it's more attractive to do the right thing. So we can think about this by way of incentives. If you think about the puzzle of getting people to pollute less in driving, we could try to get people to just drive less, try to get people to give up their cars and ride bikes instead. And some people will be persuaded by that and will kind of go to great lengths and make their lives more difficult in some ways for the sake of the environment. People really care about the environment, and that's a virtuous thing to do. But for most people, that's not really going to be a plausible option. And so what we have to do is change the options available so that the most attractive options are the ones that are also aligned with the problem we're trying to solve. So think about electric cars. Cool electric cars and electric cars that are cheaper and are better, faster or more attractive than gasoline cars. If we can get electric cars to take off in that way, then it's no longer about convincing people to buy an electric car because it's the right thing to do for the planet. Instead, the electric cars will just take off just because they're the best option. So that changes the problem from one of trying to convince people to do the morally right thing, which is hard to do, to just getting people to do the right thing because that's like the easiest option. That's the most attractive option. Another example in this kind of same approach is cultured meat. So cultured meat is available in some places. You can buy meat that is real animal cells, but it has been grown in a vat instead of being grown on an animal, on a chicken or a cow. And so it has the taste and the texture of animal meat because it is animal meat, but it doesn't cause the animal suffering, and it doesn't cause the pollution, or at least like the kind of same type of pollution. Growing the meat right now there's still a challenge about how to do it in a low kind of energy way. But assuming that those problems get solved, then we will be able to solve the problem of meat, the problem of suffering for animals, the problem of methane and other pollution, which is bad for the planet, the problem of runoff and so on, by having this better option. If we can make it cheaper and if we can make it just as tasty as the meat that we currently have available, then people will switch without really having to think about like what the morally right thing to do is. So that kind of incentive structure will be much better. We can go the other way and think about disincentives. And this approach is going to be more applicable for Calgary's situation. What Calgary has to do, and what Calgary is doing, is using various sorts of disincentives to encourage people to do the right thing to save water. So one of them is fines. You can have bylaw officers going out, and if they see people who are using water in a way that's been banned, then they can give them a ticket, and that will prevent people from doing it. Of course, some people are still going to get away with it, but again, the nature of collective action problems is that it doesn't have to be that every single person stops. It just has to be that in general, most people are doing the right thing. You can also have social stigma, which is one of the strongest ways of enforcing collective action. So if you see your neighbor filling up his swimming pool and you go out and tell him off, or if you post on social media that he isn't following the rules and he's making it worse for everybody, then that will make it less likely that other people are going to do that they're going to be shamed and they're going to feel really bad. And so it's just not going to be worth it for them. These are ways of encouraging cooperation that isn't really possible in kind of an unorganized way. It takes coordination to get people to do the right thing in these cases. So all of this shows why collective action problems are so difficult, that it takes the coordination of many people, in Calgary's case, over 1 million people, to come together and to do the right thing. And that is difficult to do. It's actually hard to do just by trying to encourage people to do the moral thing. I think making arguments like that is helpful, but it's much more helpful, or it's going to be much more effective if we can find other reasons. There's one silver lining, though, that I think that we can take out of collective action problems. I think that in a way that they're very depressing. It's like sad to think about that so many of these cases come up that are just kind of like outside of our control, that it really doesn't matter what we do. But the positive aspect of it is that in some cases, people just, I think, put too much blame or responsibility on themselves, that their actions are going to be, they put too much weight on them. So I think this comes up when when people are thinking about travel, for instance, that you want to go see a loved one you haven't seen in a long time, and it's going to involve you taking a flight, or you're a vegetarian and there's a situation where there's just no meat-free options anywhere, and you're really hungry, and you've got an important meeting to do, and whatever, those kinds of stories. I think in many of these cases that we can blame ourselves, or we can put too much pressure on ourselves that solving these problems is up to us, that climate change is like our singular responsibility, or preventing factory farming is something that we alone can do. And I think that thinking about collective action problems, it can kind of actually take some of the pressure away, that all of these are kind of up at a higher level, and they remove us from kind of thinking about it just as individual responsibility. The problem, of course, or the risk, is that we can go too far the other way and just think oh, everything's a collective action problem, I don't have a role to play. And that's definitely not the message here. That's definitely not the case. We can individually make differences in some important ways, but we have to be strategic about it, and we have to think which actions are going to produce the most good. Thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate it. We'll see you in the next one.